Judge Malik Carter has spent his life fighting for justice, equality, and the rights of the underrepresented. One evening, while helping a teenage girl injured in a hit-and-run, Malik becomes the victim of police brutality at the hands of a racist officer. What begins as an act of kindness spirals into a harrowing experience of wrongful arrest and public humiliation. As the truth comes out, Malik finds himself at the center of a national justice movement. His story becomes a powerful symbol of the fight against systemic racism, sparking outrage, support, and a renewed push for change. Will Malik's unshakable determination be enough to bring about the justice he has always believed in? Or will the weight of the system crush him? If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Judge Malik Carter has dedicated his career to upholding the law, fighting for equality, and standing firmly against racial injustice. His commitment to justice has been unwavering, but everything changes when an act of kindness, a late-night rescue of a teenage girl struck by a car, leads to his brutal arrest at the hands of a racist police officer. In an ironic twist of fate, Malik becomes a victim of the very system he has tirelessly worked to reform. Beaten, humiliated, and wrongfully detained, Malik's life is turned upside down as the truth of the incident slowly begins to surface. What starts as a moment of heroism quickly spirals into a media frenzy, transforming him into the face of a national movement demanding justice. With mounting public pressure and a dark history of corruption threatening to unravel, Malik finds himself in the fight of his life, not only for his dignity and freedom, but also for everyone wronged by a system rigged against them. Can one man's unyielding determination bring about justice in a landscape where it has so often failed? Or will the oppressive weight of the system succeed in silencing him? Shattered Justice is a gripping legal drama that explores themes of courage, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of truth against all odds. As Judge Malik Carter stepped through the courthouse doors, he felt the warmth of the evening air wrap around him, a stark contrast to the tense atmosphere he had just left behind. The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting a vibrant orange glow over the city that he loved and served. He adjusted his suit jacket, his thoughts still lingering on the challenging discrimination case he had presided over that day. It had been a grueling experience, one that brought back painful memories of the racial injustices he had encountered while navigating his path through law school. "It never gets easier," he muttered to himself, shaking off the weight of the day as he made his way toward his car. He had witnessed far too many instances of bias and inequality in the courtroom, but each small victory felt like a step forward in a long, arduous journey. Just then, his phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from his wife, Victoria. "Dinner's almost ready. Can't wait to see you," she had written. A smile crept onto his face as he quickly replied, "Heading home now, love you." With that, he started the car and began the familiar drive back to his neighborhood. The streets were gradually quieting down, the stress of the day beginning to melt away with each passing block. But just a few streets away from home, his attention was abruptly captured by the sight of flashing lights in the distance. As he drew closer, his heart sank. A crumpled figure lay in the middle of the road just beyond a crosswalk, evidence of a hit-and-run. Instinctively, Malik pulled over, his judge's mind racing through the necessary protocols. However, the human side of him, father, husband, protector, took precedence. He rushed to the girl's side, quickly assessing the situation. She appeared no older than 17, her body limp and a pool of blood forming beneath her head. Hey, he urged, his voice shaking with urgency. "It's going to be okay. I'm here with you." He fumbled for his phone, dialing 911 as he knelt beside her, checking for a pulse. "911, what's your emergency?" the operator asked. "This is Judge Malik Carter. I'm at the intersection of Sycamore and Elm. A young girl has been struck by a car, and she's bleeding profusely. Please send an ambulance immediately." The girl moaned softly, her eyelids fluttering as Malik kept his hand gently resting on her shoulder, trying to provide some comfort. "Hold on, just hold on. Help is on the way." Moments later, the familiar sight of flashing blue lights illuminated the street, and Malik felt a wave of relief wash over him. But as the police cruiser pulled up, that relief quickly dissipated. Officer James Riley stepped out of the vehicle, his expression hardened, and his hand hovering ominously near his holster, ready for action. "What's going on here?" Riley barked, his voice cutting through the tense air like a knife. Malik raised his hands in a gesture of surrender, his palms open and facing the officer. "I'm helping her. I called for an ambulance. I'm Judge Malik Carter." The weight of his title felt almost like a shield, but he sensed it had little effect on the officer before him. "Get away from her," Riley interrupted sharply, his eyes narrowing as he took a step closer. The suspicion radiating from him was palpable, making the air around them feel electric. "Step back now." Confused but compliant, Malik stood still, his hands still raised. "Officer, I'm trying to help. She's hurt badly. Please, I'm a judge." He hoped the gravity of his position would diffuse the situation. "I don't care who you are," Riley spat, his voice laced with disdain. "Turn around, hands on the car." Malik blinked, stunned and struggling to comprehend the rapid shift in dynamics. "What? No, you've got this wrong. I said turn around." Riley's voice escalated, and Malik noticed the officer's hand moving toward his gun. A wave of fear washed over him, his heart skipping a beat as adrenaline surged. Slowly, he did as he was told, confusion and disbelief swirling in his mind. "This is a mistake," Malik began to protest, but before he could finish his sentence, Riley grabbed his arm, yanking it behind his back with brutal force. "Stop resisting," Riley growled, the words heavy with an unwarranted accusation. "I'm not resisting," Malik winced, a sharp pain shooting up his arm as Riley twisted it roughly. The pressure was unbearable, and he felt himself shoved hard against the cold metal of the squad car, the impact knocking the breath from his lungs. Riley cuffed him with an intensity that felt both excessive and unnecessary. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 1 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. You think you can pull something like this and walk away just because you're a judge? Riley hissed, his breath hot against Malik's ear. "Not on my watch." Malik's face pressed against the unforgiving surface of the car, his vision blurring with a mix of anger and confusion. He had been trying to save a girl's life, and now, in an ironic twist of fate, he was the one in peril. How had it come to this? "You're hurting me," Malik gritted out, his mind racing to find the right words to de-escalate the situation. "I'm not the criminal here." A small crowd had gathered, neighbors stepping cautiously out of their homes, their expressions a blend of shock and disbelief. Some of them held up their phones, recording the unfolding scene as voices murmured in protest. "Hey, that's Judge Carter," someone shouted, their voice rising above the others. Riley ignored the onlookers, his focus solely on keeping Malik pinned to the car. "You don't move, got it?" he barked, shoving Malik into the back of his cruiser with unnecessary force, slamming the door shut behind him. Malik winced, feeling the tightness of the handcuffs digging into his wrists, a throbbing pain reminding him of the reality he now faced. From his cramped seat in the police car, he could see the paramedics finally arriving, rushing to attend to the girl he had been trying to help. The urgency of their movements sent a chill down his spine. He had been detained, and the girl, the reason he had stopped to assist, was still lying there, fighting for her life. Through the cruiser window, Malik watched as the paramedics lifted the girl, Alyssa, he overheard someone say, onto a stretcher. They were working quickly, their faces etched with determination as they tried to stabilize her before wheeling her into the ambulance. Malik's mind raced with a torrent of emotions. His entire life had been dedicated to upholding justice and doing what was right. Yet here he was, treated like a criminal while the real danger. The driver who had fled the scene and left Alyssa to die was still out there, unaccountable. He caught a glimpse of Riley speaking into his radio, still ignoring the gathering crowd and the critical state of the girl he had sought to help. Malik's stomach churned with a mix of anger and frustration. How had it come to this? Suddenly, a voice interrupted his spiraling thoughts. A woman from the crowd, her phone held high in defiance. "I got it all on video, Judge. We're going to make sure they see this." Her words resonated with a flicker of hope amidst the chaos, as Malik clung to the possibility of being vindicated. Malik's heart clenched tightly in his chest, the weight of the night's events slowly settling in. The implications of what had just transpired were beginning to dawn on him, and it was overwhelming. This moment wasn't just about his struggle. It resonated deeply with the experiences of every black man who had ever been unjustly detained, every individual who had faced mistreatment at the hands of those sworn to protect them. The realization hit him hard. His fight for justice was not merely a personal endeavor, it was just beginning, a rallying cry for all who had been wronged. As the paramedics rushed away with Alyssa, Malik felt a hollow ache spreading through his chest, a gnawing emptiness that was hard to bear. He had done everything he could to help her, but now it felt like it hadn't been enough. Alyssa's life hung precariously in the balance, and in that moment, he understood that his future felt equally uncertain. The flashing lights of the ambulance receded into the darkness, leaving him alone with his swirling thoughts, cuffed and vulnerable, staring out at a world that had suddenly transformed into something unrecognizable. A place he had tried so hard to protect, now filled with shadows of doubt and fear. Later, seated at his dining room table, the echoes of the previous night's chaos swirled relentlessly in Malik's mind. His body throbbed from the brutality he had endured, but it was the emotional toll that weighed heaviest, pressing down on him like a heavy shroud. Victoria entered the room, placing a steaming cup of coffee in front of him. Her eyes were filled with concern, reflecting the depths of her worry for him. "You need to rest, Malik," she said softly, her gentle hand resting on his shoulder, a silent gesture of comfort and support. "I'm really worried about you." "I can't rest yet," Malik replied, frustration lacing his voice. "Not with everything that's happening around us." He felt the weight of the world pressing down on him, and the urgency of the moment made it impossible to find peace. Just then, the shrill ring of the phone pierced the quiet of their home, jolting Malik from his thoughts. Victoria answered, her expression shifting to one of tension as she listened intently. "It's the news," she said, handing the phone over to Malik. "They want a statement." Malik hesitated, feeling a lump form in his throat. "I'm not ready for that," he said, rubbing his forehead in an attempt to soothe his racing mind. "Not yet." Victoria let out a soft sigh, sitting down across from him, her expression serious. "You know, it's only a matter of time before this situation escalates. People are already talking about it. It's all over social media." As if on cue, her phone buzzed insistently with notifications, drawing her attention. She scrolled through the messages and news updates, her face growing increasingly grave with each one. "They have video footage, Malik," she said, holding the screen up for him to see. The clip, captured by a bystander, showed Officer Riley forcefully pinning Malik against the car, roughing him up as the crowd around them shouted for him to stop. Malik's face was obscured, his pain rendered invisible in the chaos, his voice drowned out by the uproar. "They're calling it police brutality," Victoria added, her voice thick with emotion, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on both of them. "And they're right." Malik leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen in stunned silence. The enormity of the situation pressed down on him, and he felt the walls closing in. This was no longer just a personal attack against him. It had become a symbol of something far larger, a glaring indictment of a system that had wronged so many, a system he had dedicated his life to serving. Later that day, the streets outside their home erupted with voices, a chorus of calls for justice echoing through the air. Malik and Victoria stepped out onto their porch, greeted by a vibrant wave of protesters holding up signs that boldly proclaimed "Justice for Judge Carter" and "End Police Brutality." The crowd was a beautiful tapestry of humanity, young and old, black and white, all united in their passionate call for change. A woman stepped forward from the throng, gripping a megaphone with determination. She was one of Victoria's fellow community organizers, her voice rising above the din. "Judge Carter, we're with you," she shouted, her words amplified by the megaphone. "You stood up for us in that courtroom for years, and now we're standing up for you." The crowd erupted in cheers, fists raised high in solidarity, an unyielding show of support that filled Malik with a mixture of hope and determination. Malik felt a surge of gratitude wash over him, but it was accompanied by a profound sense of responsibility that settled heavily on his shoulders. The weight of the moment hit him. These individuals were relying on him to advocate for justice, not only for himself, but for all those who had suffered injustices at the hands of a flawed system. Victoria, sensing his internal struggle, gently squeezed his hand. "We're going to make sure your story is heard," she said with unwavering conviction in her voice. "You're not in this fight alone." Malik nodded, a renewed sense of determination solidifying within him. "I won't let them silence me," he declared, his voice firm and resolute. The hospital room around him was a sanctuary of stillness, punctuated only by the soft, rhythmic beeping of machines that monitored Alyssa's fragile condition. Malik stood vigil by her bedside, his eyes fixated on the gentle rise and fall of her chest as she breathed, each movement a testament to her struggle. She lay unconscious, her complexion a stark shade of pale marred by the bruises that told a story of violence and pain. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, fully aware that his words would not reach her. "I tried to help you, but I couldn't do enough." If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 2 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. A wave of guilt surged through him, crashing over his heart. If only he hadn't been detained, he thought bitterly. Perhaps he could have intervened more effectively. Maybe then she wouldn't be lying here, caught in the throes of a fight for her life. Just then, the door opened, and Alyssa's mother stepped inside, her eyes red and swollen from a torrent of tears. The sight of Malik made her freeze, her expression morphing into one of confusion intertwined with recognition. "Judge Carter?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Malik nodded, feeling the weight of his title like an anchor. "I'm so sorry. I was there when it happened. I tried to help her, but—" "I know," the woman interrupted, her voice trembling with a mix of sorrow and gratitude. "I saw the video. You were trying to save her." She walked over to the bedside, gently placing a trembling hand on Alyssa's forehead, her touch filled with both love and despair. "Thank you for being there for her." Malik felt a lump form in his throat as he swallowed hard. "I'll do everything I can to ensure she gets the justice she deserves," he promised, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his heart. The woman nodded, tears cascading down her cheeks like a silent acknowledgement of their shared pain. "That's all we want. Justice," she replied, her voice breaking. Meanwhile, across town, the atmosphere within the police department was charged with tension as they scrambled to manage the fallout from the incident. Officer Riley sat in a small, dimly lit room, flanked by his superior officers, their expressions a mix of concern and frustration. Chief Daniels paced back and forth, his brow furrowed and his jaw clenched tight. "This is a mess," he muttered under his breath, the weight of the situation evident in his voice. "A damn mess." Riley shifted uncomfortably in his seat, feeling the pressure mounting. "I didn't know he was a judge," he explained, his voice strained. "He looked suspicious, so I did what I was trained to do." Chief Daniels halted in his tracks, his eyes narrowing as he fixed his gaze on Riley. "What you did was escalate the situation unnecessarily. You didn't follow protocol. Now we have a viral video that makes it seem like we're endorsing police brutality." Riley's jaw tightened defensively. "I was doing my job," he insisted, but the tremor in his voice betrayed his uncertainty. "Your job," Daniels snapped, his voice laced with indignation, "is to protect and serve, not to assault innocent civilians, judge or no judge." A tense silence enveloped the room, the air thick with unspoken accusations and the gravity of the situation. Leaning back in his chair, Riley's face hardened, revealing a flicker of defiance. "What's going to happen now?" he asked, his voice low. Daniels let out a heavy sigh, the weight of the moment evident in his posture. "We're going to have to open an investigation. The media is all over this, and we can't afford to appear as if we're trying to cover anything up. You're suspended, effective immediately." Riley's face flushed with anger and disbelief. "You can't be serious. I've been on the force for years, and now you've put us all at risk," he retorted, frustration boiling over as the implications of his suspension began to sink in. Daniel shot back sharply, We have no choice." The weight of the words hung in the air as Riley stormed out of the room, frustration radiating from his every move. Daniel sank heavily into a chair, his fingers instinctively rubbing his temples as the tension of the situation settled in. He knew this was only the beginning, a mere prelude to the storm that was brewing. The challenges ahead loomed larger than he could imagine. Meanwhile, at home, Malik was deeply immersed in a strategy session at the kitchen table. Surrounded by his lawyer, Samuel Price, and a group of passionate civil rights activists, the atmosphere was charged with urgency and determination. Hours had slipped by as they meticulously reviewed the evidence and plotted their next moves in the fight for justice. "We have the video evidence, and we've gathered eyewitness accounts," Samuel declared, tapping a stack of documents emphatically. "This is a robust case, Malik. We can go after Riley personally, and we can also hold the department accountable for their negligence." Malik nodded in acknowledgement, but his thoughts were elsewhere, swirling with a larger narrative. "It's not just about Riley," he emphasized, his voice steady yet impassioned. "This situation is about systemic racism. We need to shine a light on the deeper issues at play here." Victoria, who sat closely beside him, leaned in with fervor. "He's right. This is more than just one rogue officer. It's about dismantling a system that has perpetuated these injustices for far too long." Samuel sighed, his brow furrowing in contemplation. "I completely understand the bigger picture, but we must be strategic in our approach. If we push too aggressively, they're going to retaliate with everything they've got." "I'm not afraid of them," Malik asserted, a fire igniting in his chest. "I've dedicated my entire career to fighting for justice, and I refuse to back down now." A profound silence enveloped the room as everyone absorbed Malik's unwavering resolve. The path ahead promised to be arduous and fraught with challenges, yet Malik's determination radiated strength. Victoria gently placed her hand over his, her eyes sparkling with shared conviction. "We're going to win this, for Alyssa, for you, and for everyone who has faced injustice." Malik nodded, his heart swelling with a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't merely a personal battle for his dignity. It was a fight for justice on a much larger scale, and he was prepared to engage in that struggle. As the scene shifted to the courthouse, Malik sat across from Samuel in the bustling environment that felt distinctly different today. It was no longer just a place where he presided over legal matters. It was now a battleground for his fight for justice. Samuel leaned forward, spreading an array of documents across the table with a sense of gravity. "We've officially filed charges against Officer Riley and the police department for misconduct. This case is poised to be monumental, Malik." The media is already buzzing with anticipation. Malik nodded, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the table, a reflection of his focused mindset. It's not merely about Riley's actions. This is about addressing systemic failures and ensuring accountability across the board. Samuel's expression softened, revealing a glimmer of understanding. "I know that's important to you, but remember, this is also deeply personal. Don't lose sight of that aspect." Malik leaned back in his chair, a heavy sigh escaping his lips. "I won't lose that focus, but I need this case to carry real significance. It can't just be another instance that gets brushed aside and forgotten." As they continued to strategize, the doors swung open and Victoria entered, her expression a mix of pride and concern. "How are things progressing?" she asked, taking a seat beside Malik. "We're ready to move forward," Malik replied, meeting her gaze with reassurance. "It's time to hold them accountable for what they've done." Samuel glanced at his watch, urgency evident in his tone. "Let's go file the charges publicly. This moment marks the official beginning of our fight." Inside the courthouse, Riley sat with his defense team, the tension palpable in the air. His lawyer, Bradley Watson, was rifling through a folder of documents, his brow furrowed with concern. "Look, James," Bradley began, his tone serious. "The media is portraying you as the villain in this situation. We need to shift the narrative in your favor. I've done some digging into Malik's history, and there are a few minor issues we might be able to leverage." Riley raised an eyebrow, curiosity piqued. "What kind of issues are you talking about?" Bradley smirked slightly, a glint of mischief in his eyes. We could highlight incidents where he's been particularly outspoken about racial injustice. Let's frame it so he appears as an activist judge, which could make it seem like he was antagonizing you during the arrest. Riley frowned, a sense of unease washing over him. But that's not what happened. Bradley waved a hand dismissively, brushing off Riley's concerns as if they were insignificant. Doesn't matter. Our objective is to create reasonable doubt. The goal here isn't to prove your innocence outright. It's about clouding the narrative enough so that the jury isn't entirely sure of what to believe. Riley shifted uncomfortably in his seat, doubt gnawing at him. I'm not sure about this approach. Trust me, Bradley replied, his cold smile betraying a ruthless confidence. We'll ensure the jury perceives you as just a cop doing his job, nothing more. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 3 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. As the courtroom buzzed with anticipation, the trial officially commenced. Samuel, the prosecutor, called Alyssa to the stand, her mother sitting nervously in the gallery, worry etched across her face. Alyssa, still pale from her injuries but recovered enough to walk, approached the witness stand with a calm determination that belied her youth. Malik sat at the plaintiff's table, his heart heavy with emotion as he watched her take her seat. He hadn't seen her since the hospital, and the sight of her here, ready to testify, filled him with a complex mix of hope and sorrow. Samuel stood, addressing the court with a steady voice. Alyssa Johnson, please tell us what transpired on the night of the incident. Alyssa cleared her throat, her voice unwavering as she recounted her experience. I was crossing the street when a car came out of nowhere. It struck me, and everything went black. The next thing I remember is waking up in the hospital. Samuel nodded thoughtfully, stepping closer to her. Did you see anyone trying to help you before you lost consciousness? Alyssa turned her gaze directly to Malik, her expression resolute. Yes, Judge Carter was there. He was trying to help me. I remember hearing his voice telling me that everything was going to be okay. Samuel turned to the jury, his tone emphasizing her words. So you can confirm that Judge Carter was acting as a good Samaritan, trying to save your life in that moment? Yes, Alyssa replied firmly, her conviction clear. He was helping me. He wasn't doing anything wrong. The defense lawyer, Bradley, rose from his seat, preparing to cross-examine. His voice was calm, yet there was an undercurrent of tension. You were severely injured that night. Isn't it possible that your memory of those events might be somewhat unreliable? Alyssa's jaw tightened, her resolve hardening. I know what I heard. He was helping me. Bradley smiled, but the warmth didn't reach his eyes. But you can't possibly remember every detail, can you? I remember enough, Alyssa shot back defiantly. I remember Judge Carter trying to save me, and I remember the police hurting him instead of helping me. As the trial progressed, Samuel decided it was time to shift gears. The defense had painted Riley as a dedicated officer who simply made a mistake under pressure, but Samuel had a different plan in mind. We have new evidence to present, Samuel announced, holding up a thick folder that seemed to carry the weight of many unspoken truths. This file contains extensive records of Officer Riley's history on the force, specifically complaints regarding racial profiling and excessive use of force. A murmur rippled through the courtroom as the judge motioned for the documents to be submitted into evidence. Samuel stepped closer to the jury, the gravity of the situation palpable in the room. What we have here is a clear pattern of behavior, a troubling history of targeting individuals based on their race. Officer Riley isn't merely a man who made one mistake. He represents a larger, systemic issue within this police department. Bradley sprang to his feet, objecting vehemently. Your Honor, this is entirely irrelevant to the case at hand. The judge shook his head firmly. Overruled. The jury will consider this. Samuel continued, his voice resonating with conviction. Officer Riley has a documented history of misconduct, and the department has systematically covered it up. This isn't an isolated incident. It's a reflection of a system that prioritizes its protection over the pursuit of justice. The tension in the courtroom reached a fever pitch. As the trial drew closer to its conclusion, Malik sat beside Samuel, anxiously awaiting the jury's return after hours of deliberation. His heart raced in his chest, the weight of the past few weeks pressing heavily upon him. In the front row, Victoria sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her face a mask of anticipation. Nearby, Alyssa and her mother were seated, their eyes glued to the jury as they filed in, the atmosphere thick with expectation. The judge cleared his throat, preparing to address the jury, the final moments of this pivotal trial hanging in the balance. "Foreman, has the jury reached a verdict?" The tension in the courtroom was palpable as all eyes turned to the foreman, who stood slowly, a folded piece of paper clutched tightly in his hand. "We have, Your Honor," he replied, his voice steady yet solemn. Malik held his breath, feeling time stretch as the foreman unfolded the paper, the words on it poised to reshape the trajectory of his life. In the case of Judge Malik Carter versus Officer James Riley, we find the defendant, Officer Riley, guilty of misconduct and excessive use of force. A collective sigh of relief swept through the courtroom, a wave of emotion washing over the spectators. Victoria, seated beside Malik, let out a soft cry of joy, instinctively covering her mouth as tears glistened in her eyes. Malik felt a surge of emotion, an overwhelming mix of relief and disbelief, but he remained still, absorbing the gravity of this pivotal moment. The judge, with a grave expression, addressed Riley directly. "Officer Riley, you are hereby found guilty of the charges brought against you. You will be remanded into custody pending sentencing." As these words hung in the air, Riley stood, his face a mask of anger and disbelief. He was led out of the courtroom by officers, his previously confident demeanor crumbling to reveal a man who appeared to have lost everything he once held dear. As the courtroom began to empty, Malik turned to Victoria, pulling her into a tight embrace. "We did it," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. She nodded, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "You did it, Malik. You fought for justice," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Malik's gaze drifted to Alyssa, who stood nearby, smiling through her tears. He walked over to her, extending a hand with a deep sense of gratitude. "Thank you, Alyssa," he said softly. "Your strength helped make this possible." Alyssa took his hand, her grip firm and resolute. "No, thank you. You saved me that night. This is your victory," she affirmed, her voice steady despite the emotions flooding her. Looking around the courtroom, Malik felt his heart swell with a mix of relief and pride. This wasn't merely a personal victory. It was a triumph for everyone who had ever faced injustice and discrimination. Yet, even as the verdict settled in, Malik knew the fight wasn't over. There remained much more work to be done, much more to advocate for. As he exited the courthouse, surrounded by supporters and a throng of media, Malik felt the weight of his newfound responsibility settle on his shoulders. This trial had marked just the beginning of a long journey. The systemic issues that had allowed this misconduct to occur still needed addressing, and he was more than ready to lead that charge. The courtroom had been charged with tension, filled with anticipation as both legal teams prepared for their closing arguments. Malik sat quietly at the plaintiff's table, his eyes scanning the room, absorbing the gravity of the moment. His heart was heavy with the weight of the stakes, yet his resolve remained unshaken. He glanced at Victoria, who offered him a reassuring smile, silently reminding him of the strength they had forged together throughout this arduous battle. Samuel, Malik's lawyer, rose to present his closing statement. He moved deliberately to the center of the courtroom, his gaze locking onto the jury with an intensity that demanded their attention. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Samuel began, his voice steady yet imbued with passion. "We have presented undeniable evidence of what transpired on that fateful night. Officer Riley, driven by racial prejudice and a blatant disregard for protocol, wrongfully detained and brutally assaulted an innocent man. Judge Malik Carter, while neglecting to render aid to a critically injured young woman, Alyssa Johnson." He turned to the jury, his tone growing more impassioned as he pressed on. "Malik Carter is not merely a judge. He is a principled man who stood firm in his beliefs, doing what was right when the world around him turned a blind eye. He fought to save Alyssa's life, while Officer Riley, blinded by his own biases and prejudgments, inflicted violence instead of exercising the duty he swore to uphold. This case transcends the actions of Officer Riley alone. It is emblematic of the systemic failures that permitted such an event to occur, Samuel continued, allowing his words to linger in the charged atmosphere of the room. I urge you to consider the evidence presented, the testimonies given, and the undeniable truth of this matter. The law is designed to protect all individuals equally. Let us ensure that it does. As Samuel concluded his statement and took his seat, Malik felt the faintest stir of hope rising within him. Next up, Bradley Watson, Riley's lawyer, took his place before the jury. He wore an expression of practiced calm, his demeanor composed as he prepared to deliver his closing remarks. This case is not as straightforward as the prosecution would have you believe, Bradley began, his voice low and measured. Officer Riley was responding to a volatile situation, one fraught with uncertainty and danger. He made split-second decisions based on the information available to him in a moment of chaos. Could he have acted differently? Perhaps. But did he act with malice or intent to harm? Not. He acted in good faith, striving to protect the community he has served for years. Bradley stepped closer to the jury, his demeanor shifting as he softened his voice to a near whisper. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he began earnestly, I ask you to consider the incredibly challenging and often perilous nature of the jobs that officers like James Riley undertake. Every day, they confront danger and uncertainty, and they must make split-second decisions that can have life-altering consequences. In the heat of a chaotic situation, let us not rush to punish a man simply for doing his duty to protect and serve. As he concluded his statement and sat down, Malik felt a cold not forming in his stomach. Bradley had deftly sown seeds of doubt in the jury's minds, casting a shadow over the evidence presented. Now, the fate of justice rested squarely in the hands of the jury, and the weight of that reality was almost unbearable. The courtroom fell into an intense silence as the jury returned from their deliberation. Malik's heart pounded in his chest like a drum, each beat echoing the anxiety coursing through him. He felt the reassuring squeeze of Victoria's hands enveloping his own, grounding him in the moment. The judge, seated high at the bench, turned his attention to the jury. Has the jury reached a verdict? He inquired, his voice steady. The foreman, a middle-aged woman with a serious and resolute expression, rose from her seat. She carefully walked to the judge and handed him the folded piece of paper. In that instant, it felt as though the entire room was holding its breath, suspended in time. We have, Your Honor, she replied firmly. The judge unfolded the paper, his eyes scanning the words with gravity before he spoke, his voice resonating throughout the hushed courtroom. In the case of Judge Malik Carter versus Officer James Riley, we find the defendant, Officer Riley, guilty of misconduct and excessive use of force. Those words reverberated in the air, a monumental declaration that stunned the room into silence for a fleeting moment. Then, like a wave crashing upon the shore, relief washed over Malik. He felt the tension that had been coiled tightly in his chest begin to unravel. Victoria gasped, tears glistening in her eyes as she clutched Malik's arm, overwhelmed by the weight of the verdict. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 4 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. The judge continued with a somber tone, Officer Riley, you are hereby remanded into custody pending sentencing. Riley, whose face had once displayed composure and defiance, now showed a mixture of disbelief and shock. He was handcuffed and led away, the gravity of the moment dawning on him. The courtroom erupted into a chorus of murmurs, emotions spilling over as some of Malik's supporters embraced one another, while others shook their heads in disbelief at the outcome. Malik turned to Samuel, who offered a small but triumphant smile. We did it, Samuel whispered, patting Malik on the back with a sense of camaraderie. Victoria enveloped Malik in a tight hug, her voice filled with emotion. You fought for justice, she whispered through her tears, and you won. As the courtroom began to empty, the repercussions of the verdict were only beginning to ripple outward. Reporters swarmed the building, eager to capture every detail of the trial's conclusion, while news outlets began broadcasting the pivotal moment. Malik understood that this case transcended his struggle. It had become emblematic of a larger battle for justice and systemic reform. As Malik stepped outside with Victoria, a reporter rushed forward, microphone in hand, urgency in her tone. "Judge Carter, how do you feel now that Officer Riley has been convicted? What are your next steps?" she pressed, her eyes focused intently on him. Malik paused, weighing the significance of her question. "This is a victory," he replied calmly, his voice steady, "but it's far from the end. My case has illuminated serious flaws within the system that must be addressed. We cannot allow complacency to take hold. We must continue to advocate for reform so that situations like this never occur again." Victoria nodded in agreement beside him, her conviction evident as she added, "This isn't just about us. It's about everyone who has been wronged by this system. It's about ensuring that justice is genuinely equal for all individuals, regardless of their circumstances." As Malik and Victoria stepped away from the throng of reporters and cameras, Malik felt a deep and soothing calm wash over him. The battle for justice had been won, but he was acutely aware that the war was far from over. The sense of relief mingled with a lingering weight, reminding him of the many challenges that still lay ahead. Later that evening, Malik and Victoria made their way to the hospital to visit Alyssa. The sterile white walls of the facility felt different this time. They seemed to glow with a newfound brightness, as if some of the burdens from the past few weeks had finally begun to lift. As they entered the room, they found Alyssa sitting up in her hospital bed. She looked noticeably healthier, though her complexion still held a touch of pallor. Her mother sat by her side, her face lighting up with joy at the sight of Malik and Victoria. "Judge Carter," Alyssa greeted him softly, a tentative smile spreading across her face. "I saw the news. You won." Malik settled into the chair beside her, nodding appreciatively. "We won, Alyssa, and you were a huge part of that victory." Alyssa's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, reflecting both relief and gratitude. "I was so scared that night," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But you were there. You tried to save me even when everything felt like it was falling apart." Victoria leaned closer, placing a reassuring hand on Alyssa's shoulder. "You were incredibly brave, Alyssa. Your voice was powerful and helped bring about justice. We're all so proud of you." Alyssa glanced down for a moment, her voice soft yet filled with determination. "I want to do something meaningful with my life. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I want to help people, just like you helped me." Malik smiled, a swell of pride filling his chest. "Whatever path you choose, you'll have our unwavering support. If you ever need anything, just know that we're here for you." Alyssa's mother nodded in agreement, her eyes glistening with gratitude. "Thank you, Judge Carter. You've given us more than just justice. You've given us hope for a brighter future." As the sun began to set, casting a warm, golden glow over the neighborhood, Malik and Victoria returned home. The burden of the trial felt lighter on their shoulders now. They settled onto the porch, the tranquil hum of the evening air enveloping them in a comforting embrace. Victoria leaned her head on Malik's shoulder, seeking solace and closeness in the moment. "What now?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Malik exhaled deeply, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the sun was sinking into the earth. "Now we keep fighting. There's still an immense amount of work to be done. The system is riddled with issues, but we've shown that change is achievable. We just need to keep pushing forward to ensure that this victory isn't just a fleeting moment but a catalyst for lasting change." Victoria smiled, her hand resting gently on his. "We'll do it together, just like we always have. We've faced challenges before, and we'll face them again. Our commitment to justice unites us." Malik nodded, feeling a profound sense of purpose swell within him. Together, they were a formidable force. As the sky transitioned from vibrant orange to deep indigo, Malik felt a renewed spark of hope igniting within him. The struggle for justice was far from finished, but they had secured a significant victory. With the support of people like Victoria, Samuel, Alyssa, and countless others standing beside him, Malik felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. Weeks passed since the verdict, and anticipation filled the air as Malik stood before a large crowd gathered in the city square. The community had come together for a peaceful march, both to celebrate their recent victory in court and to advocate for ongoing reforms within the police department. Dressed in a simple yet sharp suit, Malik felt a deep swell of pride as he surveyed the sea of faces before him. People from all walks of life united by a shared mission for justice and equality. Victoria stood steadfast beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She leaned in close, her voice a soft encouragement. "You're ready for this. Remember, you have the community's support. They believe in you." Malik nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and responsibility. He had addressed courtrooms filled with lawyers and judges, but this moment felt profoundly different. This was his community, a tapestry of lives intertwined, and they were looking to him for leadership and inspiration. Stepping up to the microphone, he felt the crowd's anticipation blanket him in silence. The energy was palpable, a collective heartbeat echoing in the space. "We've come a long way," Malik began, his voice strong yet measured, resonating with the weight of the moment. "We fought for justice and we won. But this victory isn't solely mine. It belongs to every single person who stood with us and believed in change when it seemed impossible. It belongs to the families who have been wronged, to the individuals who were silenced, and to those who continue to fight for equality and justice in our society." He paused, allowing his words to sink in, watching his faces brightened with hope and determination. This isn't just about one case. It's about creating a ripple effect. We must harness this momentum to demand accountability at every level, to advocate for reform that addresses the root causes of systemic injustice. Our voices must be loud and unwavering, and we must work together to create a world where every individual is treated with dignity and respect. The crowd erupted in applause, and Malik felt the energy surge through him, a powerful reminder of their shared purpose. Let this victory serve as a reminder that change is possible, that we can challenge the status quo. But we cannot stop here. We need to keep pushing for the reforms that will prevent future injustices, to create a system that serves and protects all members of our community. Together, we will continue this fight. As Malik concluded his speech, the crowd erupted in cheers, their voices harmonizing into a chorus of hope and determination. In that moment, he felt a deep connection to everyone present, a shared resolve that fueled his spirit. He knew the road ahead would be long and filled with challenges, but together, they would navigate the journey toward a more just and equitable society. A cheer erupted from the crowd, a spontaneous expression of relief and triumph, but Malik quickly raised a hand, urging them to quiet down. "But our work isn't over," he said, his voice ringing out with firm conviction. "This isn't the end of the fight. It's only the beginning. We need to continue pushing for accountability, for comprehensive reforms in the system, and for justice for all people, regardless of race, background, or circumstance." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the audience, letting them absorb the significance of what he was saying. We've all seen the damage that prejudice and unchecked power can wreak on individuals and entire communities. We've witnessed lives shattered, families torn apart, and trust eroded. But we've also witnessed something remarkable: the incredible strength of unity, the extraordinary power we possess when we come together as one, standing shoulder to shoulder in pursuit of justice. So let's keep marching, keep speaking out, and keep fighting for what's right. The crowd erupted in applause, a wave of enthusiasm and hope washing over him like a warm tide. Malik felt a surge of energy course through his veins. This wasn't just a moment of celebration. It was a moment of profound hope, a clear sign that change was not only possible but actively being pursued. A few days later, Malik found himself in the courtroom once more, this time to witness Officer Riley's sentencing. The atmosphere was quieter and more somber than during the trial. The room was filled with tension, and every face reflected the gravity of the moment. Riley, who had once walked with an air of arrogance and confidence, now sat with his head bowed, his hands cuffed in front of him, looking like a man defeated. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s with a reputation for being no-nonsense, addressed him with an unwavering gaze. "Officer James Riley, you have been found guilty of misconduct, excessive use of force, and racially motivated violence. You abused your position of power to harm an innocent man, and for that, you must face the consequences of your actions." If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, Please comment number 5 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. Malik felt a swell of pride and relief as he absorbed the weight of the judge's words. This moment was monumental, but he understood that it was just one battle in a much larger war against systemic injustice. The sentencing of Officer Riley represented a significant step forward, but Malik knew the fight was far from over. As he stepped outside the courthouse, the late afternoon sun enveloped him in its warmth, a stark contrast to the heavy thoughts swirling in his mind. Standing there, feeling the sun on his face, he could sense the shifting tides of change. Victoria, as always, was waiting for him just outside the doors, her presence a comforting anchor amidst the chaos. "You okay?" she asked, her eyes searching his for signs of his emotional state, her concern palpable. Malik nodded, feeling both tired and invigorated at the same time. A mixture of exhaustion from the fight and exhilaration from the small victories. "Yeah," he replied, "I think I am. But there's still so much more to be done." Victoria smiled softly, her encouragement lifting his spirits. "One step at a time. You've already made a difference," she reminded him, her voice laced with warmth and sincerity. Malik knew she was right. The courtroom battles, the rallies, and the push for reforms weren't merely about his case. They were about changing a broken system for everyone. Alyssa's recovery and her newfound sense of purpose stood as a powerful symbol of hope for him. Her determination to transform her trauma into something positive reminded him why he had pursued justice in the first place, why every moment of struggle was worth it. As they drove home, Malik found himself reflecting on his future. He had no illusions about the road ahead. There would undoubtedly be more obstacles to face, more individuals like Riley who would be shielded by a system that often failed to hold them accountable. But Malik also knew that he was no longer fighting alone. His community stood firmly behind him, and with each victory, no matter how small, they were one step closer to achieving lasting change. Later that night, as Malik sat on the porch beside Victoria, the familiar sounds of the neighborhood provided a comforting backdrop to their quiet conversation. Crickets chirped in the distance, and the faint laughter of children playing echoed in the warm evening air. They spoke of the future, of new cases on the horizon, upcoming reforms that could reshape their community, and their aspirations for what lay ahead. But for tonight, they allowed themselves a rare moment of peace, a brief respite from the relentless challenges that awaited them. Victoria looked up at him, her voice soft and filled with resolve. "We'll keep going, won't we?" she asked, a question that held the weight of their shared commitment. Malik met her gaze, his resolve clear and unwavering. "Always," he said with conviction, the word carrying the promise of their shared journey. "We'll keep fighting for what's right, together." At that moment, Malik understood that while the pursuit of justice might be an ongoing struggle, it was also a journey he was willing to undertake for as long as it took. With Victoria by his side and the unwavering support of his community rallying behind them, Malik felt ready to face whatever challenges awaited him. He knew that their fight was not just for the present but for future generations, for a world where justice would no longer be a privilege but a right for all. With that thought in mind, Malik leaned back in his chair, allowing the sounds of the neighborhood to envelop him, fortified by the belief that, together, they could bring about the change they so desperately sought. As we wrap up Malik Carter's powerful story, we're reminded of the resilience of the human spirit in the face of injustice. Malik's journey challenges us to reflect on our roles in the fight against systemic racism and police brutality. What have you learned from this narrative about courage, advocacy, and the pursuit of justice? We invite you to share one takeaway that you'll carry into your own life in the comments below. Your insights matter. If you like this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us on this important journey toward change.